And welcome back to Beerfield Fantasy Football. I am your host, Chris Hopper at Hot BFF with two P's. As always, joined fresh back from a brewery tour of Northern Illinois, Dan Thury. How are you?
I'm good. It was fun times. I think it was Southwest Chicago. Southwestern part of the areas. But either way, it was good times. Got to see 4 breweries, 3 up there and 1 on the way back. So I am fully stocked on beer and ready for a beer share.
Awesome. I'm also ready for beer shares, which means we need to link up sometime probably before the draft so we can just share beer.
Yes.
We do have a very, very special guest on today. I'm saying very, very special, so he feels special. But we have author of the Analytics of Dynasty and typically well-hydrated Jordan McNamara. Jordan, how are you?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me back for a reunion tour.
Always a pleasure. Before we go ahead and kick into the show, why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners where to find you? Go ahead and talk about the Analytics of Dynasty, where they can get that, what that contains, and just promote yourself for a bit. We're all about self-promotion.
Sounds good. I have released the Analytics of Dynasty, the 2020 edition. It is out on sale now at analyticsofdynasty.com/shop. You can find it there. It's available for immediate download. It's an electronic PDF copy. When I was here last year, we talked about the first book, and a lot of the questions that I had from the first book were around like Superflex, that people asked me, what does this have on Superflex and sorts of things. I didn't have a lot of data on Superflex when I wrote Analytics of Dynasty 1. So I didn't intend to write a second edition when I wrote the first one. But I got so many questions about different things and I had different ideas, and I just said, well, let's see what's there. And I just started writing again, and the Analytics of Dynasty 2020 edition popped out. So a lot on Superflex. And it's interesting because I think there's like a lot of stuff, and I tend to find this, and I'm not necessarily this person in terms of like how I think about the world, but I find the more research I do on dynasty football and football in general, I think there's a lot of things that are commonly believed that are factually wrong. And I think that, I keep finding these things in my research and they become the premise of the book, honestly. And so there's a lot of things I think that are valuable that people do pretty consistently that I think are places you can fix, places you can change. So Superflex is one. There's good hit rates. There's good metrics there on where to look for quarterbacks, and sort of how to go about building your team. I have a concept called WARP, which is wins over replacement player, that sort of you can track your quarterback value and your other positional values by that metric, which is basically it's an equalized statistic between all positions and all picks and all that sort of stuff. You can constantly track and sort of see what the optimal draft strategy is. So I did a lot of that for Superflex. I went through a lot of different things on base rates and hit rates and density of players. One question I constantly thought about was, if a player misses, if a running back misses in the first 2 years, what's their odds of hitting thereafter? And so I went ahead and answered that for all pedigrees of all different players, and sort of looked at, what's it mean for a guy like O.J. Howard, the fact that he hasn't hit for a top 12 season? Where does that sort of land him in terms of odds going forward? Just questions like that, which I think are really valuable this time around. And again, you see, and then my density argument's basically the flip side of that. All right, this player sort of came out of nowhere and they hit for a top 24 season. What does that mean going forward for them? And so looking at those different ideas to get a different idea of how players progress and how players, develop into fantasy assets. And then I looked a lot at different sort of league constructions, and I did a lot of simulations, and I call it embracing randomness. And I looked at a lot of like values on rookie drafts and values on startup drafts, and what actually happens when people trade up in drafts, like mortgage future capital for a startup pick essentially. And so and that was like probably of the things that I wrote, the most surprising thing in the entire book was that chapter about the embracing randomness and sort of what are the odds of trading up in a startup draft that actually helps you in year one. So there's all that, and it's a basically a. And people have asked me this as well. Is it just an update on the 2019 edition? Is it just new data? I'm not in the business of selling textbooks, so I'm not going to just regurgitate the same data, change a couple numbers around, and call it a new edition. It's totally brand new. There's some similar concepts. I think there's some similar threads that constantly appear and form a foundation of a very efficient and long-term dynasty successful strategy. But it is not the same data. So it's much more, I think it's more topically focused on some different things. So you can find that all at analyticsdynasty.com/shop. If you want to get the 2020 edition, you can get it for $30. I actually have the 2019 edition on sale for $20. And you can find me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. And I also have a Patreon channel where I just keep recording content late at night. The things that keep me up, I just keep recording it. And that's going strong. Just I have all these things. It's January and I have all these things to talk about. I can't wait until the season happens. And it's just going to be a constant recording of my life, it seems like. But yeah, you can find that at patreon.com/analytics@dynasty.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, definitely go ahead and sign up for that. You can already tell, very, very smart guy who does his homework. So be sure to check all that out. And if that honestly is a red-blooded fantasy player, doesn't get the juices flowing and doesn't get you excited, you might want to check your pulse.
Because I'm like chopping at the bit here. I'm like, oh man, I really want to know. I made one trade in the startup last year. It was for Chris Godwin in the 5th round. It helped.
That it did. Did you trade a future first-round pick?
No, I just traded picks within the startup.
Okay, so you didn't mortgage later on draft capital.
I mortgaged
startup draft capital
to move up. Yeah, startup draft capital. So I'm already intrigued to read it and dive into it. So
well, awesome.
Yeah, totally. I measured that. I wanted to see like people trading up, like not necessarily just trading up, but like mortgaging a future pick. Like if someone traded a 2020 first, I sort of looked at that and I was actually stunned by the results. So it's not what you would think. I'll just tell you that.
Awesome. Well, that's a good segue for today. We Jordan, us actually talked a couple weeks ago about getting him back on the show and figured that this would be a good show for him. So what we're going to go into today is really we're going to take a look at some guys from 2019 that had some down seasons for various reasons, and look at the odds that they might bounce back, and even potentially deep dive some trades that you might be able to construct for them or might be constructing for them. So we're going to leverage some of that information in real time. But before we do that, like with every show, we got to tell you what we're drinking on as we have these wonderful, fulfilling NFL conversations.
What's fueling Beer Fueled?
All right, Dan, I'll go ahead and start with you since you were injuring this week. What do you got?
I am drinking the Krabbies. Krabbies.
Good. I was wondering if you remember.
Yes, the original alcohol ginger beer. Basically, this was gifted to us from the great folks over at Krabbies to drink itself. We'll make some cocktails. We'll do that. We'll do the cocktails portion, I think, in the future episode. But
yeah,
we'll give you guys a take. Anybody out there who are big ginger beer fans, we'll give you our amateur take on ginger beer.
And Dan, I don't know if you listened to mine from the episode that you were too hungover for or not, but I definitely had an opinion on it, and it was a good one as a guy who's not a big fan of ginger beer. So
I am in the same boat as you, and I'm sure we'll have similar opinions on it.
All right, Jordan, what are you drinking on? Because I saw it wasn't water this time.
Yes, last time I embarrassed myself, and I'll be honest with you, when you guys had me on last time, I was like sort of just totally worn out from like the book tour. So you got me early on this time, so I was ready to go. And I
Good.
just as a way of backstory, I went to the store with my daughter today specifically to get this beer, and so I'm carrying it around, and people are kind of like looking at me as my 2-year-old toddler is running around the grocery store like I'm a bad parent, which it was pretty funny. So as that is a backstory, I made sure to come well prepared. A hazy little thing IPA by Sierra Nevada. So
I've had that before.
Yeah,
Not
I
too shabby.
think we've both had that one before, so not too shabby. We will be expecting a full-on review, though, for the listeners when we do our beer reviews. So, little thing that we like to spring on people. All right, before we go ahead and get into the news, I didn't make a drop for this because I just decided we were doing it about an hour before we went on air. I've thought about adding this segment for a couple weeks, and now we're just going to do it from now on. Seems like every time at some point during the week, I'm scrolling Twitter, and there's something that elicits some serious thought from me, whether it's me really contemplating something that comes up, or it's a giant what the fuck. So
Perfect.
this is the shit seen on Twitter segment, and there really are two, and they kind of go hand in hand. So I'm gonna break these down with you guys. The first thing I saw, and Dan, I know you saw this too because you responded to it. Maybe Damian Williams is the Chiefs running back of the future. Now, this is after the AFC Championship game, where Damian Williams averaged a whole 2.6 yards a carry.
Boom.
He did have 89 scrimmage yards, so he was active in the passing game, which we know he can be. When you look at the kind of overall season snippet, despite injuries, he was efficient on limited touches, which has kind of been the story of Damian Williams, but absolutely not elite, and I think that shows. So, you know, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus as far as who tweeted it or anything like that. I think that would be crappy to do. But, you know, Dan, Jordan, from your perspective, are you buying or selling that Damian Williams is the Chiefs running back of the future? Because I'm selling it, and I'm selling it hard. He might have a role, but I don't think he's the bell cow or the lead back, and I think they do need to address that position.
So, if you look back, or I don't say if you look back, I don't know if the Chiefs need to go out there and draft somebody high. I don't know if, I mean, granted, if they get a DeAndre Swift in the draft, or Jonathan Taylor, or Dobbins, or or a ECH or whoever, that'll help propel the offense. I don't think it's their biggest need. I don't see them putting high draft capital on it. I think that was a part of my quote, is that there's other pressing need. I don't say pressing, but there's other needs for them that they can address, including the replacement of Sammy Watkins at receiving core, potentially offensive line depth and defensive line depth, because I think that's where the biggest needs are. That are linebacker. I don't buy it either. If someone wants to buy it, though, I'm selling. I've been trying to sell. I'm finding windows to try to sell Damian Williams, because half the Twitter community fucking hates him. It's super difficult to actually pull it off. So I'm using this time to sell him. Jordan, do you feel the same way about this, or are you trying to buy him?
So he was like, I almost made an entire chapter in the Analytics of Dynasty 2020 edition about Damian Williams. Like it was that fascinating to me.
It's insane.
I didn't do that, but I think I could have gotten like a roundtable discussion. Like a lot of different people could have input it. It would have been an interesting idea. I ultimately didn't go with it, but I think he's fascinating for so many different reasons. Like you look at a player that comes out of the, like outside the top 150 in startup drafts and Dynasty ADP, and he was like well outside of that.
Yeah.
And it's rare that their hit rates are rare. It's really rare that they do it in like year 2. So it's possible like they get home in year 1 for a hit, but it's rare to see a bounce back on that. And so looking at Damian Williams through that lens, I sort of was pretty skeptical in 2020, but it made sense that, hey, look, he's going to be, quote, the guy. I think, and then especially that happened when they only took Darwin Thompson on day 3, who's, some people liked, but I was pretty skeptical of that. You just look at the odds of someone hitting in year 1 from that depth, and it's just super low. And so I thought maybe Damian Williams could be a thing. I ended up getting out of him where I had him, and I had a fair amount of him. I ended up getting out for, I thought it was a profit. I almost think like when you look at these things, like it's not necessarily a question of like, what's Damian Williams' upside going to be? I think you just take a bet against it in terms of like, we didn't need an answer to who the other person, who was going to take Damian Williams' job. It's okay to just say it's not going to be Damian Williams. And through this sort of committee and injuries and all these things, like that was ultimately the right answer. There wasn't really another person on the other side of that. So it wasn't personified in somebody else. And I think I hadn't really thought of that situation before. So I'm sort of looking through that lens to different situations and sort of taking that with me. So I don't think he's the back of the future, but I could see a committee. Like I could see this sort of continuing where it's sort of up in the air and you have a range of things. But I think if someone hits there on like day 2 in the draft, I mean, they're probably going to be the 101 in rookie draft. So,
well, like for this, it's like Damian Williams. It's like you're not even talking about Damian Williams. You're talking about whoever is the lead dog in the Chiefs' backfield. I mean, that was my whole argument, in the early portion of the offseason, season is that I don't believe in Damian Williams long term, but I believe in him to be, at least productive in a highly, productive offense. That didn't happen. And then through injury, I backed out of it, but we may be seeing that again. Damian Williams kind of has become the poster child of, you're not buying the player, you're buying the starting running back in this, prolific offense. And that's kind of what we could be seeing again, especially if they don't draft a guy, in day 2. I don't see it happening day 1. I don't even know if they have a day 1 pick. But I definitely don't see them bringing somebody else in because they got to start worrying about spending money. They got to, re-sign or reconstruct Patrick Mahomes here too.
But it's not a premium position. You don't have to, and this is going to segue nicely into the other part. You don't have to spend a lot of money to bring in a running back, to bring in a veteran guy, to bring in somebody else to keep that committee. If they don't retain LaShawn McCoy, who was the annoyance that kept Damian Williams from being completely the guy most of the season, aside from injuries. He had that one healthy scratch, which was for maintenance. He didn't play in the AFC title game. He was ill earlier in the week. I don't think that they want to just, hey, it's Damian Williams. There is injury history there. There has been bouts of ineffectiveness. We know he's good in limited share, and that's fine. He has that insulated value, and it's like we say on the show all the time. We don't hate players. We hate ADP. And that's what Damian Williams fell into last year, was we hated ADP. As a flex guy when he was healthy, he was perfectly fine. This is still going to be a throw-first team that, until they address the defense, is going to have to throw, which is going to limit, game script-wise, the upside you're going to get out of that number 1 guy. And as long as there's other people there to take 10 to 12 carries a game, that's going to prevent Damian Williams from being that top-end running back everybody wants Damian Williams to be. Do they need to address it on day 1? I would tend to agree. No, they do not. They do not need to go out and spend high draft capital. But they get a day 2, day 3 guy that profiles well, then there's some concern, which Darwin Thompson never even profiled well. So I wasn't sure where that came from, but
it's because people hated Damian Williams.
That's
so
it.
They wanted to make
you
Darwin
can't let
Thompson
your hate drive that perspective, though. You can't make Darwin
Exactly.
Thompson a thing just because you don't like Damian Williams. So that I said segues nicely into the next point. The other point you've seen flying around on Twitter a lot is that the 2 teams that are going to be in the Super Bowl made it with UDFAs. If you assume Raheem Mostert is the starter for San Francisco, at the running back position, you don't need an elite back to win at the NFL. The counter argument has been, well, last season it was 2 first-round picks that were in the Super Bowl, and I'll go ahead and give my take, and just like last time, let you two give your takes. My take on this is, if you have a good scheme and a good line, then no, you don't need an elite running back. The 49ers and Kyle Shanahan obviously have a good scheme. They obviously have a good line. And it doesn't matter if it's been Raheem Mostert, Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman. They've been able to run the ball and run the ball efficiently. The Chiefs had a good back in Kareem Hunt, who lit the world up. They have a decent line. And, Damian Williams has been plenty efficient. You take those same guys, though, and you stick them behind a crap offensive line, or a line that can't run block to save their life, you're not going to get the same amount of productivity. And that's where having an elite back can help you, as it can sometimes hide deficiencies in the offensive line. So it depends. If you're not going to have an elite back, you better have an elite line. If you don't have an elite line, then yeah, you want to have an elite back, and it's all about team construction from that perspective. And I don't think that you can just easily say you do or don't need an elite back to win in the NFL because it depends on what's around them. But I'll open the floor to you, to your guys' thoughts.
All right. I mean, it's always. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. It's all based on how you construct your scheme. Tennessee built their entire offense around Derrick Henry and a strong defense. I mean, that's the old 80s and 90s NFL way. Is you build around an elite running game, and you control the clock, control the pace, and let your defense do its job. Baltimore did it, but more in a new age type of era where the entire game is shaped around the quarterback and the running game. Doing effectively both. It's all about personnel pieces. You're going to find outliers and teams that are going to be productive in the inefficient way, i.e., running the football. But you're also just going to find it where you can get elite production from a day 3 UDFA guy because he fits the exact mold of your scheme. Aaron Foster was the same way for Houston for so long, and he was barely talked about before then. So you don't need one to win, but you just need one that can be effective in your scheme, to be productive and to keep the chains rolling.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's more of the. I mean, if you look at Kyle Shanahan's history and the Shanahan family, him and his father together, I mean, they've consistently, it's been scheme over player.
Yep.
And it's always, I have a running joke that they're going to, what free agent are they going to overpay on this year and then realize in season that UDFA is the better player? Last year they overpaid on, or I guess in 2019 they overpaid on Jerick McKinnon, and then McKinnon, the knee injury. But this year they again overpay on Tevin Coleman, and now it's Raheem Mostert. And I think Mostert's a good sell at this point. I think you're probably not going to get better than like a second round rookie pick.
You should be happy for that if you can get that though.
Yeah, you should totally do that. And I mean, I would even move up in the round. Package a late second Mostert for an earlier second, make that move.
Yeah.
But I don't think you need an elite running back. I think we kind of saw this, right? Tennessee gets down and is going to struggle, right? Because they can't rely on the run. And I think you are able to run the ball because you're up, right?
So,
not because
I just want to interject on that for a second. Do you think if it's, say, not Derrick Henry, but a guy like, I don't know, prime David Johnson, prime Todd Gurley, not ankle injury, Saquon Barkley, basically the elite running back that doesn't get game scripted out when it becomes a passing game, that changes that a little bit, though? Because Derrick Henry is, Derrick Henry disappeared, but he's also typically not and never has been a factor in the passing game, whereas there are other breeds of elite back out there that are more of the dual threat type that don't get game scripted out as easy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like you look at a guy like Austin Eckler, for example, and you just compare him against Melvin Gordon in terms of expected wins added and expected points added, and number fire has against that net expected points. And you just look at the difference between them, and Eckler's is better on the ground, but it's marginal, right? I mean, it's running backs don't add a ton of value on the ground. It's through the air that they add it, and he just lapped Melvin Gordon. I mean, embarrassingly so.
He lapped like everybody though, besides Christian McCaffrey. He was he was Alvin Kamara efficient from 2017. He was insane this year.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think as we go forward, the running backs that are going to go high in the draft or the running backs that teams should value should be running backs that are able to add in the pass game. And it's funny that the ultimate thumper, quote thumper, and Leonard Fournette is the guy that got 100 targets this year.
100 fucking targets.
Yeah, 100 targets.
100 targets.
I would And I had plenty of misses in 2019, so that's not, I'm not gloating here. I was as high on Fournette as I think anyone could have been, and I wasn't even reasonably close to predicting 100 targets. I mean, that is just an insane number. But it just keeps going back to get players efficient touches, and then they can make production out of them. And I've thought for a while that getting a big back out in space and throwing it to him is better than running him up the middle, right? Because you sort of can create a runway.
Yeah. As long as they don't have Peterson hands, then you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. But I think with a guy like Fournette or even a guy like Henry, like it is worth the time and effort to put a lot of energy into having him catch the ball, because you're going to create free runways for him, whereas it's more difficult to do that in the running game. And I just think when you look at some of the advanced metrics, that's consistent. So again, I would fall back on, I think scheme's more important than the eliteness of the back.
Yep. As long as they can make that first guy miss, then you're pretty good, whether it's with a stiff arm or a juke. And Henry, I saw it at least twice in the AFC Championship game where he made somebody miss with a stiff arm in the backfield that would have been for a loss. So that's the trick, is you got to get a big back that can also avoid a tackle or two. Otherwise, they're just going to get blown up. Looking at you, Jordan Howard. All right. Let's go ahead and get into some of the news, and then we'll hit the meat and potatoes of the show.
News.
All right, starting off, probably the biggest topic of conversation that I've seen over the last couple of days. Phillip Rivers has moved out of San Diego after living there his entire career while playing for the Chargers. He's relocated close to home. He actually relocated to Florida, home being in Alabama. He stated pretty much that what this means football-wise, he's not sure. A lot of people are predicting the Bucs. I saw someone predicting that he goes to the Bucs, and the Bucs tried to trade Jameis Winston, who's an undrafted free agent, as a second, third, or fourth round pick. Not sure how you trade an undrafted free agent. It just goes to show people like to have a take, whether it's an informed one or not.
Sign and trade.
But either way, to me, this seems like a situation where people are reading more into it than they should be, and I don't know that it behooves the Bucs to go to Phillip Rivers, who's basically saw this one earlier, and I agree with it, an older, less arm-talented, less mobile version of Jameis Winston.
It would be a terrible move for the Bucs to move on from Winston to Rivers. With that bad of offensive line, you got to see how pissed poor Rivers is when he has very little time to throw, and especially when when he actually has to be mobile.
Yep, I agree. I don't know where Rivers plays, if it's back with the Chargers or not. I don't really see him being a fit in Miami. Don't see him being a fit in Tampa Bay. So we'll see how that unfolds. Jordan, any thoughts on that? I tend to think it's people making a lot of ado about nothing potentially.
Yeah, I think they're probably headed for a divorce, him and the Chargers. I still think he can play. And one of the things I look at a lot is just touchdown rate. Mm-hmm. And touchdown rate in terms of quarterbacks is super fickle year over year. And some of the guys I think we're going to talk about later in the show present similar cases. But if you look at Rivers, I mean, he has a pretty low touchdown rate in terms of about 3.9% in terms of how many passes passes in which he threw a touchdown.
For those of you keeping score at home, over 5% is typically really elite.
Good.
Yeah, and so I actually looked at this a lot in the book because I wanted to look at, I think the average quarterback, I broke it down with a couple of qualifiers, but I think the average quarterback between 2000 and 2007 had 4.62 touchdown rate, and it's going up a little bit sort of as we go along. It's trending upward just because it's a more pass efficient a league. So yeah, anything up 5-6%, that's high. But one thing you note about that is it's pretty fickle year over year. So a down year doesn't necessarily predict a down year the next year. So guys like him, he was below 4, I predict a bounce back in terms of, if he goes and plays someplace. I think he has more value. And I mean, I was looking at some ADP, and he was like close to 30 in terms of expected, in terms of draft value, and especially in a super flex league. I mean, that's pretty good value in terms of a historical track record of a quarterback.
It is. And our listeners are super familiar with touchdown rate. It's one of the things that we kind of zero in on every offseason when we're talking about guys that could regress or could bounce back. We used it as a predictor for a Matt Ryan regression, a predictor for like a Patrick Mahomes, a Deshaun Watson, kind of coming back down. Lamar Jackson.
No, Lamar Jackson will definitely come down.
Yeah. Guys
the
like
3 standard deviations over the touchdown rate is
yeah,
right.
kind of coming back down to earth. So we use that as a predictor. But the other thing to look at is also why, and I think Dan hit on this, is that you had a porous offensive line there in Los Angeles. I guess I wanted to say San Diego, but in Los Angeles, and Rivers, he doesn't do good with that. And then you look at contributing factors. Okay, why did this go down? Is it because he's otherworldly? Not generally. No, he's not getting up there in the 8 to 10% range. Above 6 is a little more sustainable. Not majorly, but it's okay. Why that fell? Why? And now talking about him not going back to San Diego or Los Angeles, hasn't ever played for a different team. He has been in different schemes. It's one of those things where landing spot's going to matter for him, I think, and what's around him, what pieces does he have, what line does he have. But generally speaking, I think you're right. He is a good enough quarterback to where that below 3 should bounce back.
It just depends how many pass attempts. I mean, like when you talk about touchdown, you got to talk about in context of how many throws they're going to make. We talk about, we just talked about Lamar Jackson's touchdown rate's going to come down. Of course it is, but the touchdowns themselves could remain the same if he's throwing the football more. And we don't need to get into all, get into that whole argument there, or not argument, but conversation there. But his rate should come up if you're talking about historic regression to his mean, which is 5.2. It should come up somewhere between the mid 4s, the high 4s if you're talking about that. But just as you said, Chris, it's going to come down to where he lands. If he even decides, maybe he retires. And this is, like as you said, this is all smoke.
Yeah.
Can he afford to retire?
I don't
I think
so.
He has another kid coming, so maybe
he's got like 16 kids to put through college. And he said he doesn't want to retire, which is why this is curious, because the whole reason he commuted from San Diego to Los Angeles was he also didn't want to be, away from his friends. So you figure he's going to stay someplace, or away from his family, rather. So you figure he's going to stay someplace out, towards the southeast and towards the south, and looking at quarterback needy teams there, which I'm sure we'll get more into it when we get into free agency. I just don't know that there's a landing spot. Like Carolina, if they move on from Cam, maybe I don't know. So
yeah, I just glanced real quick. He 591 was his pass attempts this year. If you just take that up to just 1% more in terms of, you basically add 6 touchdowns to his numbers. I mean, he's easily a top 10 quarterback. Right. He slots in basically 7 through 10, and that's sort of there's kind of a tight cluster in there. But that's just all natural regression. So I think the volume. I think you hit it on the head. The volume's key.
Yep. Yeah. All right, moving on. Tevin Coleman suffered a dislocated shoulder in the AFC Championship game. He's put back in place on the sidelines. He could be back for the Super Bowl. Now, something to keep an eye on throughout the offseason. We have seen, particularly with Anthony Miller over the last 2 years, where dislocated shoulders that allow you to play for the rest of the season could result in offseason surgery, which for a running back is a big deal. No word on that yet, but just keep an eye. Even though he does play, if he does play in the Super Bowl, doesn't necessarily mean he's in the clear. Titans defensive coordinator Dean Pease is retired after 12 seasons in the NFL. Managed to have a top 12 defense in points allowed per year every year but one. Big reason for the Titans' run to the AFC title game. So he was absolutely masterful, but 70 years old, had some health concerns. So
Damn, that's impressive though.
Yeah. He's gone former Ravens defensive coordinator as well.
Yep.
The Panthers have hired Baylor defensive coordinator Phil Snow as their defensive coordinator. So Matt Rule seems to be just bringing in Baylor people, which doesn't seem like a recipe for success.
I don't know. Big 12 defenses haven't really been too good either. So
No wonder
We'll
Luke
see.
Kuechly retired.
yeah.
By the way, coming up later in the news segment, Luke Kuechly retired at the age of 28.
He'll be the new head. He'll be the new head coach soon enough.
Yeah. Tom Pelissero reports that the Texans are not expected to retain Romeo Crennel as defensive coordinator, which, good. They needed a change here. It's a secondary it's a pass rush that hadn't been able to get home, and a secondary that had been mediocre at best for the last couple seasons. So,
yeah.
Bill O'Brien took another step towards ultimate power and I think becoming the Green Goblin as the Texans have moved on from VP of Football Administration Chris Olson, whose primary job was to negotiate contracts and manage the salary cap. So I guess Bill O'Brien's going to be doing that too.
He can continue to do it poorly.
Yeah.
Jeez, it's like, I'd be pissed if I'm Texans fans, man. You're going to waste Deshaun Watson's prime and Hopkins' prime.
On Bill O'Brien having ultimate
Bill
control
fucking
over
O'Brien.
everything.
Yeah.
No
Is
word
that true
yet.
to get along with anyone, by the way? Like,
I don't know, man.
I don't think so. And I'm glad I'm not the only one that just is growing a hate for Bill O'Brien because of this. I mean, no word yet on if he's going to start, setting the concession stand prices and vending beer on his own too, but he's running everybody else out of a job, so why not?
Anyways.
Hold on, I can't call a play right now. The guy in section 305 needs a Bud Light. I'll be right back.
Can we get somebody on that, please?
Deshaun, can you
Watch
just throw
them
that?
throw it.
Can you just throw that up there?
I need you to toss this over there. What's that?
Yo, beer man. Oh, wait, that wasn't the Surface tablet I just threw on the ground. That was my beer. That was the thing I wear around my neck full of beer. Shit. The Browns fired defensive coordinator Steve Wilkes, so they're interviewing for that position too. Which, good, because that defense took a step back also. They were, going into last year, one of my favorites to actually take a step forward, and that is not the way that went.
Nope.
I already mentioned the Luke Kuechly retirement. Odell Beckham had a warrant issued for his arrest for slapping a cop in the ass that was later withdrawn. So
that was so fucking dumb.
Good on that being withdrawn.
Odell needs to be a little bit smart, and he needs to think a little bit. But Jesus Christ, he just gave somebody a Brett Favre. It's okay.
Yeah, it's just a little good game tap.
Yeah, I mean, the cop was harassing somebody for having a cigar, or they were smoking the cigars in the rooms.
Yeah, because they just wanted.
And shame on the people
title.
defending the fact that Odell should have been, arrested for it. Jesus fucking Christ, man.
Yeah, calm down. It'll be okay.
Okay, boomers.
Things that won't be okay if you're an owner of Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, Evan Ingram, Darius Slayton, Golden Tate.
Well, this might be
Sterling
good
Shepard.
for Barkley.
That could actually be good for Ingram and whoever ends up as the one there that isn't currently on the roster. But the Giants have hired ex-Cowboys head coach Jason Garrett as offensive coordinator. So easy to hit on Garrett as a head coach. Just remember, as an offensive coordinator, he did oversee Witten, Romo, Dez, in some pretty good fantasy performances. So,
I mean, he oversaw the top offense in the NFL last year. So
that's true.
I get he wasn't calling plays, but I mean, in terms of total yardage, Dallas ranked number 1. So I think it's going to be, and people don't think of him that way. And in fairness, it was Kellen Moore calling the plays, but it's a really interesting. I think it's an interesting signing.
And there's a reason he was the head coach in Dallas, and it was because of his proficiency as a play caller. He hasn't called plays since 2012, but when he was calling plays for them, they were offensively good. And despite the somehow a team with a good offense and a solid defense finds a way to be mediocre, I don't know how. The offense has never really seemed to be the problem, and especially the individual performances never really seemed to be the problem. So, Antonio Callaway is signed with the XFL's Tampa Bay Vipers, so kind of sad I can't root for a team other than the Battlehawks there because I'm a season ticket holder, because Callaway is probably about to leave the league.
I thought they were
And
on
the
this
rest-
thing where they weren't gonna, where they were gonna be like pro-America and like anti, troublemakers. And
They were, but apparently weed doesn't fall under that category.
Got it.
So, which actually makes sense.
as it should be.
As it should be. I think it was more domestic violence and kneeling they were trying to steal away from, so don't get excited about Kaepernick. I think that was the premise. I really need to put the right mic clip on this microphone. The Cowboys are going to retain offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. Going to remain the team's play caller for next season. The departure of Mike McCarthy from calling plays, he's actually going to not call plays. Said he did a lot of reflection on his overall coaching philosophy in his year off, and that was one of the things he decided to change, but probably also didn't hurt that Jerry Jones is pushing for this. So
That's good.
I think it's a good thing. Like Jordan just mentioned, they'll lead the league in yards. Let Kellen Moore continue to grow there.
Dak Prescott QB1.
Dude, I've been seeing that. You're talking about. I've been seeing that on Twitter. People thinking that the Dak's going to take over as the top quarterback next year.
It's every year that somebody gets, I don't know, somebody gets hyped every year. And unfortunately, as much as we like Dak, we're going to have to pour water on that one, I'm sure.
It depends where his ADP
redraft
falls.
season.
It depends.
It
I don't
depends.
think it'll be as insane as Watson was 2 years ago.
Okay,
than what
Mayfield.
Baker's was last year.
Yeah,
It might be Baker level, but it just depends how many quarterbacks are ahead of him.
yeah. So hopefully we don't, because we're
Hopefully.
generally pro Dak, but if he gets up into the quarterback 1 or 2 in the 6th round, we might have to pour some water on that.
He shouldn't be though, right? Like he should.
No.
He
I
should
think
not be.
Of those guys, like I don't think anyone's thinking of Dak Prescott as QB2 this season.
I
Like,
don't think so either. I hope
No,
not.
he'll be right around. I think he'll be around where like Wentz was
You just
coming into this season.
leave him in rounds 8 through 10 for me.
If he's 8, 9, 10, I'd be fine. When I start
Mhm.
looking at when I get my depth taken care of.
Yep.
I have an argument for Dak Prescott over Lamar Jackson in Superflex or in Dynasty. So you want to see
Love
people look at your side? I'd make that argument.
I'm wearing my Lamar Jackson shirt.
No,
Not pretty good for running back.
not bad for a running back.
Not bad for running back.
All right, the Antonio Brown saga continues. Agent Drew Rosenhaus conditionally cut ties with him, urging him to seek counseling. This is after a social media stream tirade against police where they were called to his house for a domestic disturbance. The Hollywood, Florida police after that pretty much said they're no longer going to accept donations from him. So how much of an asshole do you have to be for people to say, no, we don't want you to give us money? We don't want that
How
type
much
of
off the deep
association.
end do you have to go?
Yeah,
Like,
we
that's
don't-
it.
Want that association with you to where you give us free money. You're too crazy for that.
I just want to keep this saga going. I hope for the sake of AB that he gets whatever help he needs. I also want to see how far he can really take this.
I don't, because that's how Aaron Hernandez happens.
Well, I don't think he'll be. I hope not. Let's hope not. But I want to keep seeing really bad music videos made, and declaring no.
No,
white
there'll
women.
always be that. Cole
for a
Beasley
year.
still has a rap career.
And I'm sure Bell will do it when he retires.
Yeah. Yeah,
Ugh.
as long as Swag Kelly and get ready for the Drew Lock mixtape.
Oh God, lock dance off.
In Bears stuff that doesn't make sense, they've hired John DeFilippo as quarterbacks coach, a move I actually like until you get to the fact that to do that, they promoted the current quarterback coach, Dave Ragone, the pass game coordinator. That's in addition to bringing in offensive coordinator Bill Lazor, who isn't calling plays because Matt Nagy's calling plays. So just to unravel that, the head coach is the play caller. The offensive coordinator is just there, but apparently isn't coordinating the passing game because somebody else is doing that, even though he has the title of offensive coordinator. And you brought in a quarterback coach who could probably do, I would argue, all three of those things better than the people currently doing it.
I don't know what to think of this because it makes no sense. My head hurts, by the way, because of it.
My head hurts trying to unravel what the hell they're doing. As a Bears
How about
fan.
being Mark Helfrich and going from, like, in 2014, he gets to the national championship, and in 6 years, he goes from that to being fired as the offensive coordinator in Chicago. Like, just a precipitous decline in his coaching trajectory.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll be back. I don't think it was him.
No.
I think
I'm with you on that.
He should have been calling plays. My argument, by the way, just as long as we're here, has been that Nagy needs to give up play calling, and that's the change that really needs to happen because as a Bears fan and having watched them, it was way too conservative. That's my argument.
I'm with you on that. It seemed like every time they got Tariq Cohen involved, like it was like a bad. It was, they were basically trying to limit what Trubisky could do wrong. Was essentially what they were doing with Cohen. It didn't.
They were.
I mean, they didn't use him in any way to get him effective touches. It was just all laterally and behind line of scrimmage. It was disappointing.
And that's how everything was until they got behind in a game or were behind coming into halftime, and they'd start pushing the ball downfield. At the end of the season, when they made that playoff push, that's what they were doing, is they started pushing the ball downfield instead of putting everything laterally. That's the part that was so frustrating about it to me, is that you move the ball vertically, and your offense is actually moving, and yeah, he might throw a pick, but you're moving the ball and scoring points, and you're throwing it horizontally. You might not be, generating turnovers, but you're also just punting it. So
They're like running the football while passing.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's like we're gonna take the most inefficient way to throw a football and just run with it.
Yep.
Fuck it.
Yep. Ben Roethlisberger news, which will come into play here later too. Art Rooney has said the team still does not have a concrete timeline on Ben Roethlisberger's rehab. There's a huge checkup in February, as we previously mentioned on the show, but he's essentially been ruled out for OTAs and camp with an eye towards hopefully playing in week 1. So, not looking good.
What Pittsburgh does for the quarterback position, it's gonna be one of my most watched things. If they're gonna be the team to watch for, make a move up in the draft to try to take like a Tua. I know they don't have a first round pick, but
they're bringing in Rivers.
Try to make something happen.
Rivers is insurance.
Yeah. They're going to be the one that signs Tom Brady.
They're going to get Eli Manning too, and just corner
fans when
they're going to get
to root for Tom Brady there.
They're going to get Eli Manning too, and convince him not to retire, and just have that whole draft class cornered.
Oh man. All my Juju shares.
More on him later. Larry Fitzgerald is going to return for a 17th NFL season, so he apparently had enough fun playing for Kingsbury and Murray to come back, so good for him.
I don't ever want him to retire.
I don't either. Tua Tagovailoa is expected to have a 40-minute throwing session in April prior to the NFL draft, so that means he will be healthy enough to throw, so keep an eye on him as we approach Dynasty season. And after not playing last season, Antonio Gates has announced his retirement from the NFL after 16 years. Again. That's all I got for that. Let's go ahead and hit a look back and get into the real interesting stuff where other people besides me can shine on Bounceback players. Wherever I put that drop.
Beer Field Look Back.
All right, so the purpose of this segment is pretty much going to be to take a look at a handful of guys that are very, very, or had been very, very well regarded in Dynasty startup drafts or as high round Dynasty picks. Guys that were expected to have big seasons and didn't. And where their Dynasty value is at now, if we think they can bounce back, kind of what is fair trade capital for them. So we're going to go ahead and start with quarterback. I got it broken down by position. And I want to start with Jared Goff. So Jared Goff, coming off of 2018, had an absolutely monstrous breakout year. Was a streamer or better for almost the majority of the season. People expected at least that to continue or him to take the next step, and instead, that entire offense kind of tanked. The touchdown rate went down by 2.2%. Yards per attempt were down, while overall attempts were up. So we talked about touchdown rate being fickle. This is kind of like the Matt Ryan extreme of a touchdown rate dropping. Is Goff went down below 4%. So, they made some adjustments in the offseason. Do you see that helping? Do we see a bounce back for Jared Goff, or is he kind of just going to flounder in mediocrity to where he's a week-to-week stream and not much else most weeks?
So I wrote down some positives and negatives in this. I mean, I guess the biggest positive is that he still has McVay. McVay, even though the league, I think, has kind of figured him out, he's still an elite offensive mind. He can still, I mean, they still have an elite talents around him. They still have Gurley, they still have Woods, Cooks, Kupp, and Everett. Offensive line was banged up last year. Tyler Higbee, Josh Reynolds. There's still, I mean, the offensive line was banged up, but that could get better. They're not going to play a number 1 seed schedule, so the schedule should be a bit lighter for them too. He's still young. He's still just 25 years old, but I think we got to kind of see what it will look like if things go tailspin again. He's 3rd in danger plays and 7th in acceptable passes. He was 30th in clean pocket percentage and 27th in pressure completion percentage. So he broke down, just like with Baker when we talk about him in a minute. His whole psyche broke down. Even when the offense was getting okay and better, I think more so it just speaks to that this offense needs to move through Gurley and not move through Goff.
The offense needs to address the line, I think, is part of what that breaks down to as well. Because Gurley, we'll get to him in a minute, but you didn't exactly have a lot of underlying things that look good.
No.
So, Jordan, what are your thoughts on Jared Goff and his ability to bounce back from a down year?
Uh-oh.
Did we lose him?
No, he's talking. Jordan, check your mic out for a minute. Nope. I went quiet.
On-air technical difficulties. Please hold. You have to jump out and come back in, maybe. Try that. There you go. There you go.
Sorry about that. That's weird. I was just reviewing some stats for my Jared Goff take. I don't know what happened. I didn't think I muted it, but sorry about that.
No, you're good.
For Goff, I think anytime a quarterback sees a drop in gets a down year, I think it's a good opportunity to buy low depending on their profile. And so that's one of the things I looked at actually in the book research was, what are indicators of future success and what are things that present a successful profile to invest in. And so one of the things that I found was that a top 6 quarterback is a quarterback that has a top 6 quarterback season on their resume has a massive density of hit. And that's really a huge difference in terms of quarterbacks. And Goff is in that. And so you tell me a quarterback that has a really low touchdown rate, that has a top 3 in the NFL and passing attempts this season with a generational quarterback or a generational offensive mind like Sean McVay is the calling the strings, has a very good receiving core in terms of Brandon Cooks, who had a down season, but Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp and Higbee came on, and there's offensive weapons abound. I think they need to shore up their offensive line a little bit, and I wonder how they're going to do that with the capital that they have and some of the lack of draft capital that they have and a little bit of a tight salary cap situation. But I think it's doable, and we've seen teams do that where make over offensive lines in an offseason like the Bills this year. They completely made over their offensive line and overhauled 4/5 of it and perform much better. So I think that those stories are more possible of the positions to really remake. So I think Goff is, if you're going to get him in the teens and quarterbacks and you're going to get him behind guys like Mayfield and those sorts, I'm a pretty big fan of that cost, particularly in Superflex startup drafts.
Sure. And I'm right there with the two of you. I think touchdown rate first off dropping that low is not something necessarily that will be sustained. I mean, we talk about it being fickle the higher it gets, but numbers that low for a guy that, as you mentioned, has a top 6 quarterback season, normally don't stay low either, especially when you've got the type of talent that he has around him and the offensive mind that he has. So I think that Jared Goff is a good bounce back candidate. You can trade for him. If you can trade for him in Superflex, if somebody's soured on him, good buy low candidate is a lot of these guys might end up being.
It's always going to be based on value and cost of said player. And obviously, leagues are going to be different. League mates are going to be different.
Varies owner to owner. It all depends on the owner you're trying to buy from's opinion.
Yep.
So, but anytime somebody comes off of a bad season, it's a good time to kick the tires and see if you can't swing a value trade. If there's somebody you still believe in, because that owner is likely to have a sour taste in their mouth. All right, moving on to Baker Mayfield. So Baker Mayfield, the aforementioned, obviously the season didn't go as expected. Freddie Kitchens didn't lead the Browns offense to another season of mediocrity, and pretty much everything was down for Baker Mayfield. Completion percentage was down 5%. Touchdown rate was down over a full percent. Interception rate was up a full percent. Took 15 more sacks than he did in previous year. Sack percentage obviously up because of that. And overall just a disaster in Cleveland with the talent that was there. They'll have another year to mesh. New coaching staff, new everything there. Does that give you some hope for Baker to realize some of the potential he flashed in year one that seemingly disappeared in year two? Because there is precedent for year two growing pains going away in year three.
Yeah, I have a huge man crush on Baker. So I may be a little bit biased in this, but them bringing in Stefanski to kind of call plays and kind of help groom this offense is a little bit better for Baker. Baker's some of the best things he does is in play action and in rollout, which was the two best things that Stefanski got from Kirk Cousins. Similar makeup in terms of talent around him. He substitute Diggs and Thielen in for Landry and Odell, and get a hyper athletic tight end and Njoku, if you can stay healthy. Piss poor offensive line, so that's not even an excuse anymore. But everything should get better. Everything went tailspin. This was like the Philadelphia Eagles dream team of 6-7 years ago. Nothing worked out, from the GM to the coaching staff to the offense, to defense, and everything around it just went tailspin on them. And you can put a lot of that blame on Baker. Some of the outside stuff with all those commercials and things like that, and the fact that he probably needs to keep his mouth shut. But he can't get, I don't see it getting much worse than what we saw last year. I do expect positive regressions in almost everything. He just came off of a record-setting rookie year. Problem is, his costs may be still a bit too high for some of the risks that that may now come with it. Now that we've seen a season like this from him.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical. I was a Baker fan coming out. I think of and you saw him go as high as quarterback 2 in Superflex startup drafts, and Dynasty startup drafts in the offseason, which as I did the research for the book, I'll never make that mistake again, in terms of, not that I took him that high, but I will be banging the drum against that cost. Just in terms of, you look at we can love Baker, and I'm pro Baker generally as a player. It's just the cost is just ludicrous at that high. And when you have a player that has not yet hit, right? Even if you think he's better than his cohorts, like the hit rate on quarterbacks that high in the draft, I broke down draft pedigree, and I did it in a couple different ways in terms of what I was measuring for. But I looked a lot at quarterbacks that had top 12 finishes and sort of how they hit, and then top 6 finishes. And the guys that truly get there are the top 6 finish guys. They're the guys that have a lot of, that have a really dense hit in terms of their career. Only 45% of the top 10 picks get there. And so we can like Baker, right? But he is still in a cohort that's less than a coin flip of being a long-term starter. And so in terms of fantasy, and so I have to be skeptical on that. And you sort of get to year 3, and year 3 becomes a really big indicator of future success. If you have a guy that has not hit through year 2, he comes into year 3, that year 3 number really is a big indicator going forward in terms of success. And so all of these guys, like Josh Allen's probably isn't. He has a better resume so far, but both Darnold and Mayfield, when you get to that part of your career and you have not hit yet, it's a dangerous value proposition going forward. So as quarterback 10, like, or whatever he's going, I think he's quarterback. I've seen him at quarterback 10. I'm pretty skeptical on that cost at this point, although I like it better than last year.
Yeah, quarterback 10 is a lot easier to pay, but I'm glad you brought up the year 3 thing, because that's always kind of what we've used as the demarc point for us too, is that you got to give a guy at least 3 years to see if they're gonna hit, they're gonna break out, or they're gonna show the type of progression that you want to see out of them. And then if you don't get there, then you're probably never gonna get there if you haven't seen it by year 3. It becomes very, very rare for, I think, all positions that after year 3 that happens.
And it happens a little bit differently. I actually looked at this. I call the chapter base rates. Quarterbacks that have not hit through year 2, top 10 guys, 47% of them produce a top 12 season in the rest of their career. So you're still looking at a half, less than half of them do that.
Right.
That have missed the first 2 years. If they miss in year 3, 11%.
Oh.
So it is a big, in terms of that is and actually it's funny because of the places where pedigree typically matters big time in terms of production, this is one of the ones where it doesn't. So quarterbacks in the top 10 of the draft, if they've missed 3 straight years, they fall off a cliff. Quarterbacks not taken in the top 10 don't do that as much. They still decline, but the actually non-top 10 quarterbacks, 20% of them have hit after they missed the first 3 years. And I think that goes a little bit towards the different trajectory of their careers. But Darnold, like if you're looking at like Darnold and Mayfield, like they got to do it this year or it's a really bad track. And it's going to be associated with a value decline. And so you see a guy like Daniel Jones and Darnold be right next to each other. You'd rather, I think, pretty clearly based on that data, you'd rather have Daniel Jones than Darnold because you're going to get an extra year of window in that development.
Yeah, and you make a good point about trajectories there too, for guys inside the top 10 versus out of, because you also take a look at opportunity. The guys that are taken in the top 10 are typically going to get their opportunity sooner than somebody taken outside of the top 10 or even outside of the first round. So
absolutely, and that's actually true at other positions too. Like,
yep,
I was surprised by wide receiver.
Wide receivers all over the freaking place. It looks like,
yeah. But wide receivers fall off. Like if you're not like Corey Davis is on a really bad track in terms of there's only been 3 guys in the past and this century that have missed the first 3 years as round 1 guys and hit. It's been Peter Warrick, Michael Crabtree, and Devontae Parker. And so we're in day 2. That's actually a more common story because you see guys like Golden Tate and Robert Woods change teams, and that actually happens for them. So it's really interesting, and it was surprising. That data was really surprising for me.
Yeah,
so I wonder with quarterbacks too is that those top 10s, it's the expectations, it's all the surrounding noise, and the fact that you go to a top 10 team, generally that team has a bad roster. There's a lot of influx changes. You just look at Cleveland in general. There's the amount of changes.
Look at Darnold and the Jets,
offensive coordinator, the Jets too. It's almost like it becomes a psyche thing because they're propped up to be a top 10 pick, a top 10 player. They fail or they show some success, but they ultimately fail, and that just takes a weight on them. With guys who are outside the top 10, either late first all the way down to 7th round picks, those expectations drastically drop as they become more sought as developmental pieces instead of I need to play them week 1 because of a fan base or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and actually, year 4 coincides with the guys that miss. So the guys that don't produce a top 12 season, on average, they start 50.25%. So 50 and a quarter NFL starts in their career, which coincidentally falls right in year 4 where you see the decline. So if they've started from the beginning, that is sort of where that is the wall, is year 4. So,
well, it's the win now league, and
Mhm.
like the fact that coaches aren't afforded time, players aren't afforded time. These owners and these fans in general, too, maybe not for the same reasons, want to see success on the field. For owners, it's money. For fans, it's entertainment. And if you keep seeing a top 10 pick fail, you get kind of antsy about it.
Yeah, you absolutely do, and you make another good point also with stats and percentages and everything. They obviously give you a very, very, very good indicator, but a wise man once said situations are situational. So you gotta, everything can have a narrative to it, so you just gotta make sure you're taking as clear of a lens as possible. And stats are probably the number one indicator as to what you're going to see. But you mentioned somebody like Darnold, for example, who's right now is under a coaching staff through year 2 and year 3 that is not traditionally churned out success. So let's say that there were to be a regime change there, he doesn't hit in year 3, there's a regime change. Maybe there's a little more hope for him versus somebody that is consistently underperforming. So there's always things to look at. But I completely agree with the Darnold versus Daniel Jones take, and we've kind of known for a long time. And I'm glad that, I know, Jordan, you've done a lot more research into it than we have. We've always kind of had that hunch, but that year 3 is really the demarc point for success versus when that falls off of a cliff.
Yeah.
So on to player 3, who's well past 3 years. Our third and final quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. So you got 2 down years in a row for Rodgers. You got a sub-5 touchdown rate, under 600 pass attempts on those years. He always kind of has been more touchdown reliant than anything. He's only been over 4,500 yards once. In most of the seasons where he was a guy that was giving you top 1, top 2 quarterback finishes, were seasons where he's throwing for 30, 35 plus touchdowns a year. And that hasn't been the case, and that hasn't been happening. He's still over 4,000 yards. Pass attempts are about the same, but the Packers are getting it done in different ways. We've seen more of a run game out of them than we've seen in Rodgers' tenure. How do we feel about Aaron Rodgers going forward? I know he's been hotly contested on certain shows that we're friends with. So how do you feel about Rodgers going forward, Dan? Because touchdown dependency scares me a little bit, but especially with the philosophy change.
Yeah, so I put this in there because you put in 2 young quarterbacks that are kind of in that gray area, which has brought a great conversation. Let's bring in a quarterback who you can see championship caliber type of rosters in terms of Dynasty make a trade for. Rodgers, as you just said, he's never been a product of getting it done through volume. It's always been through massive efficiency. And I think people are living in the 2011 to 2014 years of just insane touchdown rate, followed by decent yardage, but it's always been a staple of Rodgers is low interceptions. He's smart with the football. He just plays a different style of game than what a guy like Winston does for it. And now we've seen the potential age cliff take him. You can't beat Father Time. Athletically, he's always lived off of his ridiculous ability to keep plays extended, and just he's the best quarterback on the run that we probably have ever seen, at least in a long time. I know that we may see that change now with Mahomes and Wilson and guys like that, but Rodgers made a living off of being mobile and throwing on the run. But for me personally, this goes beyond stats, analytics, and all that things. I think Green Bay recognizes that their window is closing completely, and they need to finally address the big elephant in the room is that Rodgers can't make these very subpar athletes at wide receiver good anymore. We like Lazard here, but he's he's not scaring defenses away. He's not, commanding the type of targets that we saw or the type of attention that we saw from Cobb and from Devontae Adams when Jordy Nelson was still there. So to me personally, I wanted to put him on there because I want to hear you guys' thoughts on a player that's been deemed, godlike, that we've now seen, become more immortal, or has become more immortal.
Yeah, I think he's become much more mortal. Try saying that while you're on a IPA tasting a binge. But you keep seeing like the analytics crowd talking about his basically reduction in efficiency and all of these things. I can't separate that from the decrease in talent around him. And I don't know if we have a good way to say, is it a chicken or an egg problem? Is it the fact that, Jordy Nelson is gone and Randall Cobb is gone, and this offense that basically vaulted him to being a Hall of Famer? Devontae Adams was a wide receiver 3, right? Now he's a wide receiver 1, and he's a really, really good wide receiver 1. But he was a wide receiver 3 when Rodgers was doing it at the levels of the heights of his career. I mean, that's sort of what we're talking about. And there's been no backfill, right? I don't think I'm pretty sure that Devontae Adams is the last person they drafted on, the last wide receiver they drafted on day 2.
He was.
And you just sort of look at maybe Ty Montgomery would have been right around that time too, if he was drafted as a wide receiver or whatever he was.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I just I would like to see some additional talent around him, and some of the players that they passed on that were successful. I mean, they had a shot at AJ Brown this year, and some of the other guys that went on day 2, they had shots at and passed on them. And I would like to see some additional weapons around him. I think he is in a decline phase. I think that if they added some weapons around him, that he could be a potential a guy that continues to play into his late 30s and 40s effectively.
I think they'll do the same thing that they did with Breeze, but yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, and that's another thing entirely, is Breeze is getting it almost entirely done through Michael Thomas, aside from Jared Cook showing up there. But I do agree, they've drafted some guys where we liked a certain part of their makeup. Like I liked Alan Lazard a lot, and then he went undrafted, and that's normally not a good sign. And Dan, I know that you were big on Equanimous St. Brown, and that hasn't panned out. And Valdez Scantling looked like he was going to be the guy, and everybody loved Geronimo Allison, and that wasn't it. And it's like they keep buying lottery tickets, trying to hit a home run, instead of just spending the capital to go get somebody good to shore it up. And they did that a little bit with Jay Sternberger this year, who he loved as a pass catching tight end, but tight ends typically come along slower, and he was hurt for the first half of the season. They brought in the shell of Jimmy Graham. That obviously wasn't the answer. And I do think they need to do a little bit more than just lottery tickets at wide receiver. Now, Devontae Adams being a wide receiver 3, sure. He was also younger. Wide receivers with the year 1 productivity rate are rare, and got to grow into that role, and that's a good thing. We've seen a lot of success out of wide receivers that are allowed to grow into that role, but it's the lack of backfill that has really hindered him. But where they didn't backfill wide receivers, they went out and drafted Aaron Jones, who's been very, very good, and he's also gotten a lot more red zone looks. There's a reason why Rodgers' touchdown rate is down. It's because Aaron Jones had 19 of them. So,
Aaron Jones.
You're looking for a correlation. That's why I say the philosophy change scares me a little bit, because you don't have Jordy Nelson there anymore, and they have Jimmy Graham, and they're not using him in the red zone. They're just letting Aaron Jones punch it in. And that's going to be detrimental to Aaron Rodgers as long as that's the case. If they're just going to rely on the running game to punch it in down in the red zone, you're not going to get those quarterback 1 year. So while I see a scenario, and I think this draft is going to be really, really telling for what this team wants to be, especially with LaFleur in place, it's also something that you got to be wary of is how it relates to Aaron Rodgers, because I think if they don't go out and spend some draft capital on a wide receiver this season, or at least make a splash in free agency on a wide receiver, that you're just going to get more of the same philosophy on offense. Because, I mean, it worked well enough for him to win ugly.
Yeah. It's also against, suboptimal schedule. But either way, yeah. I 100% agree. I do think they'll make their splash in free agency. I think they're going to go out there and do everything they possibly can to try to get Rodgers back to the Super Bowl.
Yep. All right. Moving on to running back, and gonna try to move through this a little bit faster. So moving on to running back, Saquon Barkley. Numbers down across the board. He had a great rookie season, obviously. Came back in. Not a great year, too. I'm basically chalking this one up to injury. And
I mean, he was hurt for most of the year.
Yeah, he had the high ankle sprain. We've seen it with Leonard Fournette in the past, too. A bigger back, where when you have that injury, and you have that injury mid-season, and you come back from it quick, and he came back from it quick, you lose your agility. You lose your ability to evade tackles, to cut, to be explosive in and out of those cuts, and that's more or less what I'm chalking this up to for Saquon Barkley. Is Jordan, Dan, do you guys have a differing opinion on that at all?
No, I think it's a bounce back opportunity off the injury.
Yeah. If you can find somebody who's even remotely nervous about Barkley, go exploit it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's gonna. I mean, it's just this entire offense. The Giants' offense should get better. They should have a top offensive line again. Daniel Jones year 2. It's just like what the Rams have done, even though they don't have the play callers and the GM in place. It's going to go through Barkley again.
Yep. All right, more interesting case study. A guy that's still in his mid-20s, a lot of miles on the tires. Todd Gurley. Average under 4 yards a carry for the first time since his sophomore season, which was much maligned. Everybody remembers that. Where he had the great rookie year, came back in and was absolute trash his second year. Lowest yardage total of his career. Targets and receiving yards both way down. Lowest attempts per game of his career. This is a unexplained philosophy change of the offense, or do you think this is entirely related to the arthritic knee?
You can go ahead, Jordan.
It's funny because he's still in his mid-20s. Like it's for as much of his career as we've seen so far, he's still in his mid-20s. So I think the arthritic knee is certainly a factor in terms of his career arc. But it's not like anyone was coming to take his job. And this whole thing about Darrell Henderson being, some of the narratives got so out of control with him, a year ago, or in the spring of last year, none of that really came to fruition. So Gurley's back under contract. I think it's more of a year-to-year type deal. I mean, he had 12 touchdowns, and I think the offense in general was down this year, and I think we can expect a bounce back just based on some of the natural regressions that we talked about. So I probably wouldn't build around him in a startup, but I think he's plenty capable of producing another top 12 season.
Yeah, he's definitely somebody that I'd be out there trying to buy. If you're someone who's got, championship aspirations, who's got a decent roster, who wants to take that chance on him. Like I said about Jared Goff, I think this Rams team goes back to moving and building the offense and running the offense through Gurley, letting, Goff become, more of the background piece, see, like the Vikings from this past year, and what the Rams did, just 2 years ago. And then you'll see those, regression come up. And with them having an improved offensive line should also help, and Gurley 1 year removed from, from the knee issues.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you can really say removed from the knee issues because degenerative doesn't go away. But I think the offensive line's a bigger issue than the knees. So, all right, another older guy who did anybody really know what to expect from Le'Veon Bell this year? First off,
I don't even think Bell knew what to expect from himself this year.
Okay, because it was terrible.
It was horrible.
Look, we saw some signs of decline his last. Another guy that's in his mid-20s, but we saw some signs of slowing down maybe a little bit his last year in Pittsburgh, which would have been, 2 years ago because the year off, the efficiency was down, but the volume was still there. And this year was just abysmal. 3.2 yards a carry. Attempts per game were lower than really has ever seen. His efficiency as a receiver was down. He was top 24 in yards created, 17th in evaded tackles, 19th, but 19th as far as stacked front goes. So they're pretty much stacking the box against him. And no run blocking efficiency whatsoever. Does it get better for Bell in New York? Does he got to get out of New York? Is it a him problem? Is it a team problem? What do you guys see with this?
It's a Gase problem. But all joking aside, I mean, he's 28 years old. Lot of work during his years in Pittsburgh. Some of that injury, some of the injuries maybe, creeping back up a little bit.
Year off.
May play a part in this, having a year off, going from a top 5 offensive line to a bottom 5 offensive line. The coach Gase doesn't even want him, but he's on dock for $17 million, so they really just can't cut him unless they're okay with eating that dead cap, which we've seen teams have done now recently. But he's reached the age mark where it's going to be harder and harder for him, for us to expect him to produce those RB1, RB2 numbers outside of Frank Gore and a little bit of Adrian Peterson. It doesn't really look good for these upper 20s guys, especially in Dynasty, where you have to start thinking about selling him more so than buying him.
Yeah, I think the cost is key. I mean, I'd point to the 3.2 yards per carry that's a number that's pretty variant year over year. So you can't really expect that to be predictive of future production. So there's a lot that goes into that number. Whenever I see an outlier, I'm pretty willing to bet against that occurring again. So with a low number, I think it'll go up. Yes, he was 27 this year. Yes, it was a down year for him, and he was still running back 16 in terms of points, in terms of total PPR points, and he averaged over 20 touches a game. And you just look around, and I think the interesting disconnect is the fact that he's going to be I was looking at his ADP, and he is, 4th, 5th round type of startup pick in Dynasty. But at the same time, that would be 106, 107 type range for the historical rookie equivalency. I don't think you're getting anywhere near that in terms of trading for him in the market. So, in an existing league. So I mean, if people are going to be, if it falls to the level of he's a 2nd round rookie pick valuation, I think you almost have to be in on that.
Oh yeah, you have to buy for just the volume alone. I mean, it just comes to where how we evaluate rookie picks, year over end, with all the running backs that just went back to school. I mean, people are now freaking out about what the value is for a late first now, and they're starting to to calculate where the drop off is for those picks. When it comes to buying these players, regardless of age, it's always it's always based around value and what you expect from them, coming into the next year. Bell, we have to assume that they're not going to, bring another running back that should be a threat to his touches. You almost have to expect some sort of natural positive regression year 2 with your, with the offensive scheme. Hopefully Darnold not getting mono, and hopefully the offensive line can actually improve. Because you look at him, it's kind of like, Fournette in a more extreme case where the offense couldn't produce enough chances for him to get scoring. I think he never had a play over 20 yards too. So if the offense can actually improve,
he had one breakaway run.
One breakaway. That's
over
15
20
yards on Player Profiler. That's terrible. So improvement of the offensive line, the improvement in the offense can give him more scoring chances. You expect those, I think it was 3 or 4 total touchdowns to go up. He's still not a sexy name, but people are going to be afraid of, if enough people shit on him, his value is going to continue to decline where he becomes a buy. See Derrick Henry,
Yep. All right. Moving on from Bell, we got a couple more young guys to get to. I think the most intriguing one, though, without an obvious answer, was Sony Michel's fall from grace. He did less with more opportunities, under 4 yards per attempt, Underlying numbers for Juke evaded tackles and yards essentially the same as years before, but well down as far as yards created go. He's in an offense that doesn't feature running back, so the only way he's going to be productive at a high level is to be efficient, and that efficiency definitely wasn't there. Yeah, he had a slow start to the season with some knee issues, but overall, he one of few guys listed here that didn't have an excuse or an explicable reason for the fall off. Conditions are really the same from year 1 to year 2. How do we see Sony Michel?
He's interesting to me because I've always viewed Michel as someone who needs to be a change of pace back plus.
Yes.
The bigger size back that you want to put him in space. You want to give him high value, high efficient touches and let him work. And the Patriots drafted him as not that. They already had that in James White. James White isn't big, and they tried that with Rex Burkhead. We all assumed he would have became the next Deion Lewis for that offense. But now Tom Brady has regressed so much athletically, or just so much in talent wise, that his unknown with that roster could shape up a lot of things. Both James White and Rex Burkhead have outs in 2020. I think if Brady does leave New England, James White's out and Michel steps into that role. Maybe you start to see more of a hybrid of what you would have saw from White and Deion Lewis, back from a few years ago. Which means that he could finally hit on the value that we all expected. More passes in the passing game. We heard that all offseason that he was going to get more involved. He had 20 targets this year.
Yeah, and if the receiving numbers go up, then the productivity, I think, is inherently going to go up for him as of the point value. But
I mean, the Patriots offense just couldn't ever really get going. Brady has regressed enough where you have to start thinking about it from a fantasy perspective. What that's going to do for all the playmakers in this, on this team, and that includes the running backs, because that, you got a couple in what you expect from scoring for them. I've been lukewarm on Michel, but I think there's some interesting, there's an interesting narrative to paint if Brady leaves and we see a whole new New England team.
Yeah, I can't get over the fact that they passed on Nick Chubb for Sony Michel.
I've been scratching my head at that, and Darius guys.
Yeah. That has never. I've never understood that one. I was pretty big on I was pretty big on Damian Harris coming into this season in rookie drafts last year, just because I was pretty tepid on Michel in terms of what he offered, and it was pretty much what I saw on tape with him this year in terms of his production. That's kind of the player that I thought he was.
Yeah.
And so this whole offense is pretty fascinating in terms of what's going to happen with Brady. I think there's a pretty good chance he's gone. And how do they evolve from that? Michel's going to be an interesting buy low candidate in just terms of the first round running back pedigree. I mean, their hit rate's really high. They rarely miss. But you're looking 6th, 7th round in startup drafts. I mean, if that could be an interesting spot in terms of a pedigree buy low option, even though I don't necessarily love the player.
Yeah, I don't love the player, and I don't love the spot just based on how they tend to use backs. And you mentioned Damian Harris, and that's an interesting one, especially with Burkhead and White having outs. If they opt out of either of those, you could see an expanded role for Damian Harris, who is a guy a lot of people were high on. And if he plays well, that could actually go the other way for Sony. So it really is kind of a buy low type of lottery ticket there for Sony Michel, because I think of anybody else, I don't really have a feeling for which way that could go, because it could go either way. Like Dan mentioned, if he gets more involved in the passing game, then obviously his value is going to go up a bit. But if Damian Harris sees an expanded role and Sony Michel continues to be inefficient, then you're kind of looking at a week-to-week flex play.
Yeah, I just don't see this team investing another, day 1, day 2 pick on a running back if they do like Burkhead and White go. I still think it's going to be because Brady's gone. there is some value there.
But-
I've always thought Damon Harris should be the first and second down grinder, that
Yeah.
short yardage guy who can, who can handle that type of role on this team.
And again, they may not have to invest high draft capital because you have the in-house option, and
Yep.
I'm not sure where some of these guys that I've earmarked for tape based on college productivity are projected to go in the draft, but it looks like there might be some value there later as well for guys that profile well. All right, let's go ahead and hit a beer review because I'm almost at a beer and I'm getting tired of looking at it before it's gone. So
Right.
let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll finish up with a couple more backs and some wide receivers and tight ends.
Beer review.
All right, Dan, what do you think of Krabby's ginger beer?
So I'm like you. I have a very love-hate relationship with ginger beers. I don't like them on their own, and I don't like them too gingery in mixes when you make like a Moscow Mule or a Dark and Stormy. On the smell of this, I was a bit nervous because it's a very heavy ginger smell. On taste though, it's completely different. It's obviously there. It's called a ginger beer. You're going to taste ginger, but it's not overbearing in that taste. It's smooth. I think that inherent richness from it kind of helps level out the almost bitterness you would get from ginger, or just that off dry from it. So I don't necessarily enjoy drinking ginger beers. I didn't not enjoy this. So Krabby's did a good job. I can see why people are very popular with them. I'm more interested to see how this mixes though. So I'm excited to figure out what type of mixed drink I want to use with it.
Yep, and we'll talk about that. That should be coming up here within the next week or two. As far as the mixed drink episode, I was very similar with Krabby's, though. I don't tend to like ginger beer, but I liked that ginger beer because I thought it had more of a cider backbone to it, with kind of that real crisp sweetness, and the ginger on the aftertaste wasn't harsh, which is normally what I don't like about ginger beers. Is the aftertaste can be very, very harsh and very, very kind of dry and spicy, and this one doesn't do that. So, I had Surly's Rocket Surgery Hazy Ale, and as far as hazy ales go, it doesn't have a lot of bitterness. There's a slight bitterness in the backbone. Kind of a nice pop of citrus at the beginning with that juicy, not dry mouthfeel. So almost like you bit into fruit, but it's citrusy without being sour. Almost that way all the way through. Like I said, a little bit of light bitterness, a little light backbone. Kind of a weird thing to hit shelves in the middle of winter, because I think it'd be a very, very good warm weather beer. But overall, it is a very, very good beer, and one that I hope they keep around and isn't just limited release, because next to Todd, it's probably my favorite hop, which they do a lot of hop beers, but probably one of my favorite things that I've had from them. All right, Jordan. Review time.
All right. Yeah, my hazy little thing. I have been on a little bit more of an IPA kick recently, and one of the things I would say I dislike about IPAs is that they can tend to be a little bit bitter, and so you get some of the super hoppy bitterness that wasn't present here. It's a smooth drink. I think it tastes really good. And the 6.7 alcohol by volume is a nice bang for your buck. So I enjoyed it, and I'll be drinking it again.
That was honestly one of the better beer reviews we've ever put people on the spot that's been given. When
Yeah,
we
you
put
did better
people
than
on the
when I
spot
used to
give
give.
one. Like, that was better than Dan for the first 3 seasons.
But let's be real here. Most of my beer reviews would always come after you guys, after you and Nick,
And we were drinking the same thing, which was a little.
and we were always
different.
drinking the same thing. So like, there's always been what used to be the ongoing joke of it. A game review.
It's
It'd be
good.
just 2 words. It's good. It's okay.
They said it all.
Yeah.
A little different
So
now
I've
that we're not
evolved the
all.
game as Nick. I've had to evolve my or expand my knowledge of how to taste beer
in
when
your
Nick left the show. And
in your
thankfully,
vocabulary
I
because
have to I have to expand my vocabulary too. Yeah, which is always fun for our listeners.
which not drinking the same thing helps
That too,
because then you can't just
and working
figure
at a
that.
liquor store
That
and
true.
in the beer department where I get to try a lot of different beers.
That too. All right, let's go and jump back into this and finish strong. I don't want to spend. I had James Conner on this list. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on James Conner. That offense was completely in shambles. I don't know about you guys. I'm not necessarily worried about it. It's an injury-riddled year. Again, with an offense that just, once Ben went down, there just wasn't any teeth to it. Juju was injured all year. Yeah, anything on James Conner that you guys want to add or that stuck out or that makes you think that he's not the guy going forward?
Just with how bad his backups
If anybody
were.
says Jalen Samuels, I'm throwing something.
No, it's how bad their backups were. I think just kind of cements what we expect. The only thing that's going to hold Connor back is health. And that's always been the concern is durability. We saw it late last year, or late in 18, and we saw it again this year. Big Ben back, hopefully Big Ben back, should really propel this team to at least higher heights. It can't get much worse than Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges.
Benny Snell.
Yeah, I'm buying a bounce back of the entire offense. So
Yeah.
include Connor in that.
Sweet.
Probably more so in season long than Dynasty, but
Yeah,
I like the bounce back.
I'm on the fence with him as a true buy in Dynasty, but definitely in redraft.
Yep. All right, David Johnson. What are we doing with him after injuries of benching, not being any better than last year efficiency-wise? Kenyon Drake coming in and looking really good. He's almost certainly got to go someplace else for that to matter, right? Or does he just need to be healthy in Arizona and Kenyon Drake get shoot off?
I mean, Drake's a free agent, so I had the salary pulled up. I don't know what happened to it in terms of what they could do with David Johnson. But 28
They
years
can't
old
do
too.
anything. It's a disaster.
Exactly. He's 28 years old. He was very good before he got hurt. I don't think he was ever healthy coming out of, I forgot what his injury was now too. They just kind of led the way for Kenyon Drake to be what Kenyon Drake has done in years past, and that's dominate at the end of the season. And hopefully this time he gets an actual opportunity. I want him to leave Arizona. I want him to go to Tampa Bay or something and actually get a true chance to be a starter, which also then helps David Johnson become relevant again. But it's tough to like a guy who's reached his age, ceiling wise in terms of where we expect drop off to happen. As someone you want to go out and buy in Dynasty.
Yeah. Let's see. It was in. I've got it. Back and ankle.
Yeah. It was the back. I think the back was the big one, if I remember correctly.
The back was the first one. He missed one game with that. Showed up on 2 injury reports. The ankle was the bigger one.
Okay. I just don't think he was ever really healthy. And I think that kind of played into it. And Drake obviously did well enough to not make Johnson matter this season.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, Johnson was quizzical. I think there's a couple of explanations for it, and I'm not sure which one I buy more. A, he was hurt, which I think is a reasonable conclusion. But B, I think there's a possibility that he just doesn't fit what they're trying to do, or it's something. There's something there in terms of, I don't know if it's a personality conflict or what, but for a fit wise that they didn't like what they saw. He is due, his cap number this year is $14.25 million, $18.3 million dead cap hit. So if there's no cap savings if they cut him. So it's a disaster of a contract for them if they want to move on. It's a disaster of a contract even if they didn't want to move on. But Kenyon Drake is, I always look to Spotrac.com. They have great
that's what we normally do.
Market value. They like him for $5.5 million, basically 4 years, 22 and change. Basically 5.6 million in terms of what they expect him value wise. You put the two of those guys on the same team, and that's 10% of your cap space.
Can we
And
put
it's just-
Kenyon
that's
Drake in
wow.
Kansas City or Tampa Bay, please?
That'd be wild. He would be a big. He would be a
He
big
pairs back with
ball.
David Williams again. A better Miami. Let's go.
Yeah. But Drake, I think I think it's a pretty interesting situation for him. Because I don't think the cost is unreasonable at this particular point. So
I think we've seen it before, and so people may be a little more tepid into buying it this time. I mean, people bought it after, the whole, when he, came out when David Williams got hurt and they traded Jay away, and he exploded. People bought into that. Obviously, didn't work out because of Adam Gase and amongst other things. And then you see now is, people might be a little more tepid, and the fact that he's a free agent, he can go to Houston and potentially thrive, Tampa Bay, Kansas City again.
I can promise
It's
you I
interesting.
will never be tepid on Kenyon Drake.
What? Well, we know you won't.
But it's funny because he was this high level pick in Dynasty and some other formats. I mean, he was really expensive in 2018 in terms of being like a top 15, top 20 running back, and produced a RB14 finish. And people, for some reason, bailed on that, right? Like I'm not sure what people expected, but then his price drops 2 rounds, and it just was a quizzical thing, and it ended up being right and then wrong and then whatever. But it was the fact that it was disappointing after 2018 year was kind of odd to me. But I mean, I the two-way ability is really appealing, and if you put him in a pass-happy offense like he was in Arizona, with a lot of those spread systems, I mean, that's you see what you got, so I'm pretty interested in it.
I'm also interested in it. So, but back to David Johnson, him being in Arizona, and I think everybody thought that with Cliff Kingsbury coming in and it being a pass-happy offense, that was really going to benefit him, and that just didn't seem to pan out either.
I mean, it did early on, and then he got hurt.
Well,
Johnson was the RB6. He was a top 10 running back before he got hurt. He was off of 3 16-plus points in full-point PPR leagues.
He came off of basically 4 of his first 6 games were over 50 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns in that time, in that stretch. It was really the running game that kind of struggled. He had 2 kind of solid games there, but in the receiving game, he was really good. So
it's a we'll see. I think they'll let Drake go and they'll end up bringing somebody else in. Maybe David Johnson isn't someone that we can expect to see 300 plus touches again, but I think he could fit in this role. And I think year 2 in this type of offense, could benefit him. It's just I think his cost could also be high too. Yeah.
Well, in 13 games, despite the lack of rush productivity, he didn't have more than he didn't have more than 5 carries after week 6, but he did in the first 6 weeks put together. Sorry, let's just go with 13 game numbers. Those are easier. 36 for 370 and 4. That's a good season receiving for some backs. So,
yeah,
we'll see. I would say buy cautiously if the price is right. I mean, look, David Johnson owners, especially if they've been holding him, have got to be frustrated. They haven't had the type of blow up season they wanted in 3 years now. So, switching gears to wide receiver. Juju Smith-Schuster. Is this curious to anybody, or are we just attributing this to Ben?
See James Conner.
Okay.
Yep. Agreed.
Perfect.
Yeah. Buy Juju.
All right. Odell Beckham. Is this a C Baker Mayfield scenario?
If he stays, he could leave, and they can only. I think the cap it's only $2.5 million. They save almost $12.5 million if they let Baker go.
If they let Beckham go?
I mean, yeah, if they let Beckham go, not Baker.
Yeah, it would be surprising if he just fell off a cliff. So I like the offense to bounce back. I think that although him and Landry both have like cuttable-ish contracts, I expect them to come back and them to refire this thing and it go in the right direction. So I'm buying Beckham if he's falling. I mean, I've seen him in like third round of startups. I mean, that's pretty good value.
It is.
Yeah.
He's still at over 1,000 yards.
Mhm.
The touchdowns have fallen off over the last 3 seasons, but he's been over 1,000-yard receiver despite the down years. So
Yeah, he's still
it's
just
like
27 years old. You got
39
to see,
targets.
he'll be son of what Diggs was with with Stefanski, so you can see even more downfield shots with him. And
Yeah.
the fact that he came out and said that he battled the sports hernia injury all year long. So who knows how much that actually affected him, and again, who knows how much of it is true. But if he was truly banged up for most of the year, we already know what a healthy OBJ looks like, and now there's no expectations on this Browns roster, so we could see some guns ablazing.
Yeah.
Next year with this team.
All right. Speaking of Diggs and Thielen, Dan, what are you doing with them? Because the pass volume was way down across the board. For Diggs, he played the full season, 55 fewer targets than the year before, resulting in 39 fewer receptions, which is not insignificant in any form of PPR league. Aside from that, everything else was pretty well up. Yards per reception was up. Catch rate was up. Yards were about the same. Touchdown rate was touchdowns, kind of the same ballpark. It went from 9 down to 6, but still. And yards, per reception way up. Yards after catch, bit of a hit, but you're hitting them further downfield. And really, the chemistry with Cousins seemed to have gotten better, so it was just a volume thing. Do you think is that Zimmer? Was that a Stefanski thing? Does Dalvin Cook severely hurt Thielen and Diggs with him being productive and them being able to rely on the run game more? Because the volume really killed Thielen more than Diggs, but didn't help Diggs either.
It's Diggs has always been a very, very likable guy from what I've seen in Dynasty, at least on Dynasty Twitter. He's remarkably talented. He's arguably a top 5 route runner in the league. And what we saw from this past year, he is arguably now a top 5 downfield threat. Stefanski using him more in the stretch, their real vertical formation. When you roll out Cousins and use play action with the very great play action quarterback was very positive for him. 41% of the target or from the market share in air yards in the Vikings offense it's amazing to see, and it's why he is a good buy. But yes, there is some concern here, and that is the passing volume. Zimmer doesn't want to switch. Zimmer wants to continue this run focus offense, whoever they pick for their OC. So expect more of Dalvin Cook. Year 3, this is their pseudo Super Bowl, push. Because after this, Cousins guaranteed money's gone, and we could see a whole health change here. Everyone that talks about Diggs wants to see him in an offense that wants to give him 150 plus targets. If he stays healthy, we already know what that can look like. So I'm buying him for the fact that I think you're basically buying them in hopes that the volume can increase. The problem is, even when Thielen got hurt, we didn't really see that from Diggs. And you can point to the play call, you can point to the fact that the team moved through Cook. It's a contributing factor to that. But when there is no other real pass catcher there, you have to expect him to take the next leap. And you got to see frustrations throughout the year between Cousins and Diggs. I do expect that to get a little bit better going into year 3 with them. As for Thielen, though, age kind of plays a factor. He's going into his 30th year season, and that's already pause for concern. Injuries are starting to kind of creep up with them here. And again, just with the same type of concerns with Diggs' volume, you have to contribute that to Thielen. But as we saw against the Saints, Thielen can still command a heavy target share in any sort of game. So you can't buy them with wide receiver 1 aspirations. You kind of have to take the mid to high 2 with upside. We see what Thielen can do when he's the only guy there. If Diggs is banged up or misses time, we've seen Thielen take over. We haven't quite seen that consistently from Diggs when when vice versa happens. But Diggs is younger. He's only going to be 26, hyper talented. You just kind of got to hope that, if the Vikings defense does take a step back, that the passing offense can help, or what the passing offense should increase in pass attempts.
So I want to put this out in the world. 94 targets for Diggs. Do you think that's significantly worse if Thielen didn't miss 6 games?
I think the targets may dip a little bit, but the way that they use him, he's not someone that needs high volume to succeed. If the way that they use him is the same, and that's a downfield threat on rollouts from Cousins, he got 2 or 3 deep shots a game. No matter what, they're going to go, downfield him, and he's really good at tracking the football. And that shouldn't matter if Thielen is hurt or not. It's just whether or not you're going to get that medium to short, field target range, more consistently, which is what Thielen got more of. It's what Thielen does in his role.
So you're attributing Rudolph and Irv Smith being relatively startable tight ends to Thielen's absence more than Diggs's target volume, despite it still being way, way down.
Yeah.
Okay. Jordan, any thoughts on Diggs and Thielen going forward with Cook and volume? Because, volume is king.
Yeah, 466 passing attempts this year. So third fewest in the league behind Baltimore and Tennessee. So you just look at these teams, and that I expect that number to move up just based on game script and all of those sorts of things. So I expect that number to improve. I think Cousins is good, not great. So capable of producing fantasy volume for both himself and his wide receivers. I don't think he's a great asset to lift anyone super high in terms of above what you would expect a target to be worth. But notable, Diggs on his target share, so 94 targets, his receiving numbers, just his receiving points, 211.9 PPR points, 2.25 points per target. That's really high. So you would expect some regression there in terms of that number, closer to the historical average, about 1.65. So that's a lot over the normal, and that number's pretty variant year over year. So it's not something that's really sticky. So he needs to get that target volume back up. I expect that their passing attempts will go closer to league average. So I think that will help him in terms of volume and sustain this track, and potentially have a better year next year.
All right. On to tight ends. And real quick with these. So OJ Howard's a big interesting one here. You mentioned him way back in the intro. But the question here is kind of what happened, because Cameron Brate seemed to be more in favor with Arians than OJ Howard was. Drops didn't really help that. But what's your take on OJ Howard? Everybody thought the breakout was going to be this year. So going into year 3, how are you feeling, I guess?
Let down. Yeah. I look a lot at a lot of this type of analysis I did for my book is these type of things. What does it say about a player that has missed through this part of his career, and what should we sort of expect? And I have his, just based on his draft pedigree as a first round draft pick and his experience in the league, I got him as a 50-50 shot to be a top 12 tight end in his career. So I would probably take the over on that. I'd probably bet that he does it. I think it's important to keep in mind the range of outcomes on players, and we get super hyped about some of these guys. And he was basically a big play maven, and got a ton of his college production on busted plays by Clemson. Like that's a massive amount of his production came through those type of plays. He basically went 2 calendar years without a touchdown. in college. I mean, so the fact that he has struggles and inconsistency in the NFL shouldn't be surprising to anybody. But at tight end 12, I mean, the in terms of Dynasty ADP, if you're getting him in that range, I think it's an interesting potential buy low scenario. And I think if he falls any further than that, I'm even more interested.
Yeah, especially with the upside of talent, the high volume passing offense, the downfield work that you can see in Tampa Bay, as long as he can kind of win that favor back. They still have Cameron Brate locked up under a reasonable but also easy to get out of contract. So you're always gonna have to worry about that as long as that stays the same. Dan, any thoughts on OJ Howard?
Well, he's still with Bruce Arians, and as much as we want to will a very talented tight end to beat his trends, it kind of came to fruition. The fact is he is a talented blocker, but the fact is he had issues with what seemed to be everything in this scheme. It took a Godwin and Evans injury for him to finally start to see, 7-8 targets in a game. He probably looks like a guy, if he's going to break out, it could be on a second team. It just depends if there's a scheme change. It just depends if they want to work him more into the offense. So we heard almost every other week that they want to get him involved. And how much does that fall onto, OJ Howard himself, and how much does that fall onto, onto the play calling? Howard may be third or fourth read in almost every play, and that just kind of, you're going to see massive wide variances in this. Tight end 12 doesn't seem to be hard to hit anymore because of the, of the massive volatility of the tight end position from a year in, year out, with how many injuries and just how many guys just kind of, be whatever. I'm buying him because I believe in his talent. It's just you may have to wait until he finds himself into a more tight end friendly scheme.
All right, and then the only other one I had to talk about was Evan Ingram, but looking at the productivity there, is any concerns from either of you two about Evan Ingram other than just the repeated injuries?
That's my only concern.
Is this the new Jordan
maybe
Reed?
Daniel Jones, it may be Jones regressing.
No, my concerns are injury related. I think he's I think he's the real deal.
It was on pace for 136 targets, 88 receptions, 934 yards, and 6 touchdowns, which would have put him up there in the elite tier. So, that was before getting hurt and missing the last half of the season. So
that, or bringing somebody in who can take his main targets away. Not like another tight end, but a wide receiver one, or a guy who can maybe take some of the red zone looks that he gets, or those over the middle.
Even if he's not elite
off the line,
and he's in that second tier like he was with Odell, I'm still okay with it.
Yeah, I think he's fine. Young enough. He'll turn 26 some point this season. I mean, he's got every makeup to be a top breakout candidate.
We know that Gettleman run teams can lean on tight ends.
Yes, they can.
Thanks, Greg Olson.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we got for you in this show. Jordan, thank you for coming on, for hanging out late with us. One more time, tell everybody where they can get your book and be more wowed by the knowledge that you have to drop, because you've definitely dropped some good nuggets throughout the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate that. Thanks. I hope I could bring some value to your show. You can find the book at analyticsdynasty.com/shop. You can get the 2020 edition. It's on sale, and you can get it for immediate download now. It's $30. And if you're newer to Dynasty, I would recommend the 2019 edition. And it's all, one thing I would say about both books is that it's not a yearly guide, right? This isn't like a 2019 or 2020 guide to Dynasty. It's meant to be evergreen, and it's meant to be, big picture and strategic, and not necessarily tactical advice, although there is some of that in there. It's stuff that transcends just this year. So If you're newer to Dynasty or thinking about taking the plunge in, go get the 2019 edition, and it'll get you a lot of just general strategy concepts and those sorts of things. And if you're into Superflex and some more advanced things in terms of those types of formats, the 2020 edition, you can get that. You can get that too. So. And you can find me. You can find my podcast at Analytics at Dynasty, where you get your podcasts. Find me on Patreon at patreon.com/Analytics at Dynasty, or follow me on Twitter. If you have questions about the book or want to see table of contents or questions about anything like that, feel free to hit me on DMs. I'm currently unemployed, so I've got a couple weeks before I start my new job to chat away. So go ahead, hit me in my DMs, and I'll be got plenty of time to talk to you.
All right.
By the way,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for coming on. Be sure to give him a follow at minimum. Go pay for his book. Like he said, and from what I've gotten from him and off of what's been said today, it's more of a not tell you how to fish, or hand you fish, but teach you how to fish, or however that goes. As far as you can take a lot of what's being thrown out there and turn around and apply it year in and year out. So you're really making a long-term investment in your fantasy playing career. I am at Hot BFF with 2 P's. The bearded gentleman with the angelic voice is at Theory BFF with 2 F's. Dan, any parting words for the listeners?
Nope.
All right, fantastic.
Keep it short and sweet.
Be sure to follow the show at Beerfield FF. I don't think I said this in the intro. I missed the boat on that. You can subscribe on YouTube, Beerfield Fantasy Football. Show up, chat with us. I saw Dan had some conversation going in the chat a little bit earlier on, especially as we hit on Rodgers and Barkley. So show up, chat with us. Make sure you hit the notification icon and subscribe. That way you're notified when we do go live. Obviously, the podcasts are dropping on Wednesday throughout the off season. However, we can record at any point from the Wednesday that dropped to the Wednesday when the next one drops, and that will always be on YouTube. So if you want to show up, interact, hang out, that is the place to do it. And we will catch you guys next time on Beerfield Fantasy Football.
Peace.
I gotta find my mouse. I lost it somewhere. I don't know.